I am joined today by Mr. Ken Wheeler, Steve Wheeler's father. I interviewed Steve a few weeks back. I'm joined by his father from the UK. Mr. Ken, thank you for joining me this evening.
Yes, thank you.
Well, the way all these begin, I ask very general questions about your life, work through your career up until today. So first things first, please share with me how old you are.
95. That was 6 days or 7 days ago, my birthday.
Happy belated birthday.
Thank you.
Glad you could join me here today. So please, sir, let's begin. Tell me, where were you born?
I was born in Plymouth, in the southwest of the country of England.
And what was life growing up back? You said 95, so that was late 1920s. Is that correct?
1928.
Okay. Well,
Yeah.
tell me about life growing up in the late 20s, early 30s, through two world wars, and we have a lot to talk about.
Yeah, well, my father was a docker, and we were sort of poor people in that area, and I was the 13th child, my mother, and one died of influenza in 1919, and one was a stillborn. So, but I was sort of the 13th, but now there's 11 of us, and I was the baby. And over the years, they've all passed away, and I'm the only one left.
I guess that they knew when to stop. They finally got it right with you, huh? Well, tell me about life in the 30s.
Oh, well, we hadn't got a lot of traffic. It was mostly horses. And where we lived, the end of our road was a big stable. They used to use, we had a big docks in the area, and the boats would come in. My father, with other men, of course, would unload it onto these wagons, and the wagons pulled by horses would take it to where it had to go. So if it was timber, it went to the timber yard, and if it was, other food stuff, it went to the markets. Yeah, it was busy, but the wages were poor.
Well, did your mother work, or was raising 11 children enough for her to do?
Well, women never worked in those days, but you could do things like washing, people's washing and ironing and mending. So that's what she used to do.
Well, what did you and all of your siblings enjoy doing growing up?
Well, the older ones went to work if they were that age. And in fact, 3 of them became machinists making sailors' uniforms. And my other ones, sure, some of them married. My brother Harry was in the Navy. My brother Albert was in the Marines, and my brother Leslie was in the Army, and my brother Lenny was in the Navy, and there was me, and all the rest were girls.
What was the age difference from oldest down to you?
Oh, well, my oldest brother was 20 when I was born, he said.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, were you attracted to anything? What was schooling like when you were growing up?
Well, I was not very bright in school, and I was in this class. I was only about 7, and the teacher walked around the classroom, and he stopped at me and he said, "Read that." And I was a bit dyslexic, and so I started to read, and he walloped me across the face, bang, across my right here, and he said, "Read," and I couldn't see, let alone read. My eyes were full up with tears, and he slapped me again and said, "Sit down." And we all thought that the treatment like that was part of being poor. We really did. We thought nothing of it. And when I went home that night, was sitting at tea with the family, and my father was sitting on my left, and he said to me, "Have you you've been fighting, Kenny?" And I said, "No." He said, "Well, what's wrong with your face? What's those finger marks on your face?" And I thought he would know. So I said, "Oh, that was the teacher. He hit me." "What for?" So I told him, and he said, and I said, "He hit me again. He hit you again," he said. And then I must tell you about my dad. Went through the First World War. He was built like a what a huge shoulders on him, and that's why he had so much strength. And he would even box at night to get money if we hadn't got any. They used to box for money, and he would say, "I get a good pasty for 5 shillings," which was buttons, but it was money. And anyway, so next day we were in the classroom, and the teacher was taking the register, and I saw through the glass door panels, I saw my father, and he opened the door, or he tapped on the door and opened it, and the teacher looked at him and he waved his finger like this. And so he said, "Right, behave yourself," and went out the door. And he was only out there a few minutes. We could hear them talking. And when he came back in, he was white as a sheet. And my father said all he did was poke him and knocked him over because he was so big. And we never saw the teacher again. My father was going out the door, and the headmaster came down from his office, and he said, "What are you doing in my school walking about?" And so he said, "Oh, I've just been talking to one of your teachers." He said, "What about?" So he told him, and I think he just got the sack and thrown out. So that was my youth, and I've been deaf in that ear ever since.
Really?
Yeah,
Well,
and so then I went to the next school and the next school, and I was walking. My school was about a mile away up through the city, and I was walking after a nice blitz by the Germans, by the night raids, and they bombed masses of the city center was flattened, and I'm walking towards my school, and I couldn't go this way or that way because of unexploded bombs, and then there was buildings that had been hit, and all the rubber had come down across the road, so you had to walk around there or climb over it, and this went on until I got to where my school was, and there was nothing there, just a pile of red bricks, and all there was every now and again we would go out down and sit under a big tree in the playground, and we would sit there and have our teaching there, and all I could see to recognize from the school was this charred chunk of a tree, all burned and broken. And that's all that was left of the school.
so were you maybe 10 years old or so when the Blitz began?
13.
13.
Yeah.
What was life like when that first began? Tell me about that. When the first sirens rang out, but what were you up to? What were you doing?
Well, we'd be in bed. And we always went to bed early because we didn't know what time the sirens were going to go, and we'd get up. And we'd all got to bed fairly early. And they used to come around about 8 or 9 o'clock when the tide was out, so you couldn't get the water to fight the fires. They were very clever. So we had to dam up streams and rivers so we could get the water to fight the fires. And they also made these ginormous tanks in the playgrounds and parks so that they could get the water if they wanted to. For the pumps to fight the fires. And What was the question again? I've forgotten. Sorry.
Just, I guess, what life was like living under that
Yeah.
sort of danger.
So we had a concrete shelter. Where about 8 families had to share, and we came down the stairs, and Father would stop us at the door because more people got hurt from shrapnel falling from the shells that were exploding, on the enemy up there. And the shrapnel would be falling all around you. And if that hit you in the head, you'd be dead. And so we would wait there, and I must, so like to tell stories. There was a lady and a gentleman down in the bottom flat. So we came down the stairs, we were on the 2nd floor. And we were there waiting to go out when Father told us, when we heard this man saying, come on, Martha, to his wife, come on, Martha. And it was a long time before she came, and he said, Martha, come on, what are you doing? And she said, I'm looking for my teeth. And he said, my dear, the Germans are dropping bombs, not sandwiches. So there was funny things like that in the war. We would laugh at.
And
so we would, when the shelling stopped, we would go across the road into the shelters. And it was one night when it was really bad. They were bombing our area, and my brother Lenny was out. I don't know what he was doing, but he was coming home, and he actually went upstairs to the flat. Thought we were there, but then he realized we were in the shelter. So he came down, and as he walked across, the bomb exploded about 25 yards away, and a piece of shrapnel from the bomb went through his thigh and came out the other side. And he came into the shelter, and all we had was a candle in there, candles to light. We had no electricity. And my brother said, I'm hit. And one of my sisters, I think it was Gladys, she was a seamstress, as I said. And so she said, which leg? And he said, this one. And she said, take your trousers off. He said, I'm taking my trousers off in here. So she ripped them up the seam of the trousers. And there was this hole about as big as a dollar, I suppose you'd call it. And so they took their underskirts and tied it up. And then the raid was over, and we heard these sailors saying, are there any casualties? And we said yes, and they came and took my brother away. And he didn't lose his leg. They managed to save his leg, and he joined the Royal Navy and was able to fight at sea.
What can you share with me about your eldest brother's military service?
Well, my brother Harry, he was 15 when he joined the Marines, the Army, and the Navy. So he joined the Navy, and he went to a boys, like we had it in the Air Force. It was boy sailors and boy airmen, and they taught you a trade, and they taught him to be a gunner, and he became a chief petty officer in the Navy, firing guns on ships. And he was in a lot of battles in the Mediterranean when they took the convoys through to Malta, and it was some awful fighting going on. They were fighting E-boats with torpedoes, submarines, and there was mines that were dropped in the water to blow them up, and there was also ships. So they had lost a lot of ships themselves, but they kept they think the Germans didn't take Malta, and the Malta was the kingpin for the Middle East. As long as we had that, we could fight their we could sink their ships in convoys, and well, the Air Force was there as well, and the Army defending it, and they never did. They attacked it. It was one of the most, I think it was the most attacked bomb people placed bomb for its size anywhere in the world. And when I went there later on after the war, there was not a lot standing. Yeah,
Well, did any of your other siblings fight in World War II?
yeah. My brother Albert, he was on a New Zealand ship called the Achilles, and they had been in the Battle of the River Plate when they sank they didn't sink it, it blew itself up, the Graf Spee. They had damaged it so bad that the captain didn't want to lose any more. I think he lost 36 men in the battle, but he said he wasn't going to lose any more. And so he let them all get off the boat, and he allowed the engineers to scuttle the ship. And so it blew the bottom out of her, and she sank. And he was in that battle. And then he was later in the Far East, and a kamikaze plane ate the bridge or the gun tower before the bridge, and all the blast came up and killed everybody on the deck except him and one other person. And he was badly wounded and shrapnel in his chest, and but he survived. Yeah. And my other brother Leslie, he didn't have a trigger finger. He had lost it as a youth, and he only had one eye. It was his left eye. The right eye was a glass eye, and he got sent to, of all places, to Iceland. And he was a pioneer corps, so he was driving tractors and bulldozers, that sort of thing, making runways for the bigger planes to land on. And with driving this thing up and down, he got this dust in his eyes. So he went to the doctors and he said, I can't go on, sir. I need to stop driving. And he said, what do you mean you can't? And he said, well, I can't see out this eye. And he said, well, what's wrong with the other one? And he said, what, this one, sir? And he took his glass eye out. And he said, you should be here. And so they sent him home to England. Yeah. And then he was looking after the German prisoners of war that were brought back. We have prison camps all around the country, mainly in Scotland, where there was, so they couldn't they couldn't escape from there, and well, different places, and he would guard the prisoners. They didn't put able-bodied men on it. It's just people who were one leg or one arm or one eye or whatever to look after them. And they had one occasion, he told me, where they had some real nasty people. They tried to take over the camp, and it's the sort of thing we would have done anyhow. But they had to stop them and get back on top. And so they allowed them to take a piece of rubber, but what they didn't know was down the middle was lead. And so they were using this to wallop them as they were attacking the guards. And he said they shifted them from there and all the way to Canada. These troublemakers, they sent them to Canada. So they were further away. And Lenny, the one who was at the damaged leg, he was on the Mediterranean on minesweepers, clearing the passages for the ships. And his second duty was on the guns, Orlikins and things like that. And so whenever they were attacked by planes, he would go on deck and fire these guns.
So you would have been, what, 16 or 17 years old at the end of the war. Was that the,
On D-Day, which was my birthday, I was 17. So one more year and I would have been older. I'd have been at D-Day, Normandy. But I missed it by 12 months.
and was that the end of secondary school for you, or did school end? How old were you when you finished school?
14. I was 14 when I left school. We had to leave school at 14. And my sister, Queenie, worked in a bakery. And we were literally feeding all the small factories around the part of the city where we were. And we used to make pasties, Cornish pasties. It's a meal in itself, you know. And so we used to make, like, I don't know, 8,000-10,000 a day by hand. And I used to carry it all on my head up to the stairs, up through this burned church, to the shop front where they sold them to these factory workers. And well, eventually they got me a lift, you know, like one of those you pull with ropes and pull it up. Then you get up the top and empty it, then come back down. And so it wasn't so bad at the end. But I left there when I was 18 and joined the Royal Air Force. And I did 36 years.
Can you tell me about your training regimen in the RAF, your introduction to the military?
Well, we went to a boot camp, and we were there for 13 weeks, and then we were classed as, you know, airmen. And I went to my first unit, which was in Norfolk, where all the fighter pilots used to, the ones who were still alive from the Battle of Britain, they would come back there and have a summer ball, and they would be there. Some of them lived there, near there, and married. And well, my friend was a barman, and so I used to go and wash up the glasses, and so I could listen to these pilots talking about the war. Remember when I shot down this one? Remember when we did this? You know, they were talking about what they did and how they dived on them and they got damaged and so on. And well, it was marvelous to hear these men who were heroes to us. Yeah. I went from there overseas, and I went to Tripoli in North Africa. And I was only writing today to I do a blog, and some of these people write back and say, "What about this?" and so on and so on. And this particular thing was, she wrote a poem about watching the stars at night and go into the beyond, you know, the stars beyond, and so on and so on. And she wrote this poem, and so I told her that I'm so glad. Oh, she said also, you have a favorite song, a favorite sort of piece of music. And I said, yes, it was Claire de Lune. Because when I got my first night in the desert, I went out right to beyond the lights of the camp so I could see the night skies. And it was amazing. I never knew there was that many stars in the sky and so many colored ones, different colored stars. And I was telling the story, and there was a tent there where we could get a drink or buy something from the Nafi. And there was a guy there playing pop music. And I said, can't you play anything classics? And he said, how about, and he played Claire de Lune. And so I was out there looking at the stars and listening to Claire de Lune. And so I told her this story, and she said, no, you never told me that before. And she said, how wonderful it must have been. And it was one of those moments you never forget.
Do you have any interesting memories or stories about your time in boot camp?
No, no, we had people there. The whole squad. There was like 60 in a squad, and we had like a dozen that couldn't get over the assault course. They weren't quick enough, and so we would go back at night and take them through it on our, the rest of the boys would take them through it and show them how to do shortcuts and how to do this and do that. And we got them all through in the end. And but I think one failed, but he was put back up to the next course. But that nothing unusual happened.
And then are there any stories you can share that were especially memorable that you heard at that bar in Norfolk?
Oh yeah. There was but that was later. I did 2 tours in North Africa, and the first one was well, it was the city of Tripoli, and we were 20 miles outside of that, in the desert. And we were coming back one day. I was a corporal at the time, and we had to go and get our rations from the army camp at DID in Tripoli. And while I was there, one of the chaps came to me and he said, you ought to go to the docks and pick up, there's a bloke down there, it's just posted in, it's come off a ship, and you ought to pick him up and take him back to camp. So I went down to the docks, and there was this kid sitting there with these on a kit bag, and I said, chuck it in the back of the truck and get in. So we got in it, and then on the way back, we were going up and up and up and up, because it's a big mountain range we had to go up. And then when you got to the top, it was flat. And he said, he was banging on the back of the truck. So we stopped the truck and said, what's up? He said, I want to relieve myself. Oh, I said, come on, get out then. And he got out. And then he come back to the window with me and he said, look what I found. And he got a skull with a hole in there in the back blown off. And I said, where'd you find it? He said, there. I said, well, put it back. He said, no, I'm going to keep it. I said, put it back at somebody's grave. And you had to report it if you found it. And it was, when I finished my tour, I got posted back to England. And I went into the barber shop. It was a civilian shop outside the camp to get my hair cut. And I was still brown from Africa, some tan. And the barber said to me, where have you just come back from? Because he did all the chaps on the camp. I guess he knew them all. And I said, oh, I only got back, a week ago. Actually, we got 30 days leave, so it was 30 days ago. And he said, where were you? And I said, Tripoli. He said, oh, I was there. I was there in the guards. And I said, what year was that? And he said 1942, 43, that sort of time. And he said we were in we called them abstract, you call them. They were brain gun carriers, and we had this brain gun on it, and the chap out in front came in and he said, "There's somebody out there talking," and so he was a lance corporal at the time. He said, so he said, "I'll fire down." So he fired down the road like just a burst, and then he heard these voices shouting and screaming. And in the morning, they looked down and there was one dead body there, and it was shot right through the head. And that was he was a sergeant, Italian soldier sergeant, and they buried him on the side of the road, and that was what he had found, I think. And so he told me, that's that could have been the guy that I shot. But he said, nobody likes killing anybody.
Well, you said a 36-year career. What were some more highlights of the later years after that?
Highlights. Well, I served two tours in Africa. That was 2.5 years each. Then I went to Malta, where my wife came out to me, and that was in 1952. And I had to go to Egypt on several occasions. And then later we went to Gibraltar Station there on the Rock of Gibraltar. And then I served in Europe, of course, with NATO. Twice I served with NATO, 2 years each. Once in Holland, and the other one was in the Shetland Isles. And there's loads of things I can tell you, but you could be here a month.
Well, when did you meet your wife?
Well, I came back from overseas. My first tour. I came back from overseas, and I was in. When I must go back a bit. When my sisters, the war was on, the Plymouth, being a military zone, we had the streets were thronged with Polish, French, British, Canadians, Americans. Everything was there, all doing their training and so on. And so I was up in London having the time of my life dancing. And the reason I could dance was because my father said to me, 2 of your sisters are married and they don't get any social life. So I want you to go out with one of them and make sure they get home safely. And so that they wanted to go to the dance halls and dance. And so I thought, well, I'm sitting here, why don't I learn to dance? So I started to learn to dance, watching other people. And I got pretty good at it, and I really enjoyed it. And so then when I came back to England from overseas, the first place I went was London, to the Locarno Ballroom, at a big sprung floor. And I used to, I was a bit of a show off with the foxtrot and the quick step. And I looked for the one who was the best dancer and tap him on the shoulder and say, "Excuse me." And I take these girls around all over the place. And I was enjoying myself. And then one day I got back to camp, and there was a letter for me from my sister saying my mother was dying. If you want to see her, you've got to get home quick. She's had numerous strokes. And so I jumped on I got permission, and I got a 36-hour pass. So I came back home, and she was all torn, or muscles were all torn up, and she couldn't speak. And well, she had, it was awful to see. And so that was on a Saturday evening when I got home, and on the Sunday, um, I went in again and see her, and she was still alive. And I said to myself, the doctors can't do anymore. Well, the doctor said the night before she'll be dead by the morning. She'll pass away peacefully, he said, but she didn't. And so I went to this. I knew I'd had to find God, and so the doctors could do nothing anymore, and so I thought, I've got to find God. And so I went to this little church up at the top of the street, and I'd gone there during the war. When I was in the Army Cadets, we could go in there and get a cup of tea and a bun for nothing, So we used to go in there, and then they take you into the service in the church. And so when I was in the church, I was crying and crying in the back seat. And eventually on the way out, the pastor said to me, what's up, son? And so I said, my mother's dying, So he said, hang on a moment. So I went outside, and there was a dozen people outside still talking in the sunshine. And he said, can you come back in, please? And they came back in, and he said, this young man's got a problem. What's your mum called? And I said, Emma. And he said, okay. I want you all to lay your hands on him. And so they did. And they prayed for my mother's recovery. And then when I got, the prayer was, would you touch the soul and give him more years? And one of the words he said was the Jubilee years. But Jubilee years was 7 years, but I didn't know that at the time. And so he said, when you go home, expect a change. Well, there's no way I'm going to see any change, but there was. My two sisters had come, and they cleaned my mother up, combed her hair, and they changed the bedding, and they changed her nightdress, and they sat her up in bed, and because she was feeling so much better. And the end of the story was that she lived for 7 more years, which was the Jubilee years. And so then I could only come home every fortnight. The other week I had to work on duty. And when I got back the second week, I went to church to thank God for what he'd done, I thought that was the place I should do it, because that's where I asked. And I couldn't get to the morning meeting, so I went to the evening meetings. And when I walked in, there was this choir up there, mixed choir. And sitting on the left-hand side, second person in, was this beautiful woman. I never seen anybody so beautiful in my life. And it's a true story. This is it. I sat there looking up at her, and a voice said to me, that's the one you're going to marry. And I looked around me, and there was just nobody there. So I thought, well, it must be real. So anyway, I kept coming back and forth. Every time I got there, she'd go out the back door, and I didn't know it was the back door there. But I waited out the front, and a lady said to me, who are you waiting for? I've seen you waiting here lots. And I said, oh, I'm waiting for the girl up there. And I told her where it was. And she said, oh, that's Ruth. And I said, oh, yes. She said, she'll be up on the Hoe with all the youth. And the Hoe is a big place at the end of Plymouth seafront. And it's where they do all the big parades. And well, they get tens of thousands of people up there on a Sunday night singing, youth singing hymns and having a great time. And so I was up there looking for her, and I didn't see her. And then I thought, well, I'm not meant to meet her. I've tried so much. And so I walked down to get the bus, and you could get a number of buses along there, and they just come in, pick you up and gone in seconds. And I was sitting, standing there waiting for my bus. And then I see this bus go by, and sitting on it was this girl. Well, I was an athlete, and I went after her like a bullet, jumped on the back of this bus. And she was sitting all alone on the left. So I sat on the right, and I looked across at her, and I kept looking at her. And she looked at, finally caught my eye. And I said, "Did you enjoy the service tonight?" She said, "Why, were you there?" And I said, "Yes." And she said, so I sat by the side of her, and the lady came along for the fares, and I paid her fare, and mine, and took her home to where she lived, and she lived in Denport, and where Steve was born, and we lived in this house we bought, and my other son lives in it now with his family, and well, I told her all about me and about my family and this, that, and the other, and so on. And so I said, "Can I write to you?" She said, "If you want to." And so I was writing to her. My first letter, posted it, and the letter came back, and everything she said, like, was pleasant. But at the bottom, she put Romans 8:28. Do you know it? For we know that all things work together for good, for them who love God and called. Yeah.
According to his purpose.
Yeah. Anyway, so I thought, she's nailing her colors to the mast. If you're not a Christian, don't bother. So I was a believer, but I wasn't a Christian. Well, I went all out to become a Christian. And I went to all the prayer meetings and all the churches when I was off duty, And then when I come back down, I would go to church with her and to the youth club. And well, it was just, and I became a Christian. And we got married in that church. I got baptized in that church, and I got saved in that church. And well, it was it's still there now, but it's now a theater. Yeah. And we were married for 67 years.
Well, how long were you married until you started having children?
It was 7 years. 7 years. Because I was overseas most of that. Yeah, 7 years was the first one. And then it was 4 more years after that when my other son was born. Huh? Oh, 7 years later.
8 years.
Yeah.
Well, and then where were you in your military career at the time?
All right. I started off as just an airman, then I became a corporal and a sergeant, and then eventually a flight sergeant. And then, well, I shouldn't really have been a warrant officer, but it's 33 years have gone by now, so I can tell you, because you can't say anything at, you signed the, yeah. And so I can tell you the story. I was up in the Shetlands, and we had a NATO unit it was, and we had these great big listening stations. God, they were enormous, like 80 feet circles, and there was about 6 of them. And you could turn them anywhere in the world and talk to anybody, and you could listen. They used to listen to the Russian ships, and then they would record it and then send it to London where it was translated. And so we had an exercise on, and I was driving to work, beautiful day, and I'm driving to work, and you have to drive with the Vosges. You can't do it in a straight line because you got to follow the shape of the island to get there and to where my camp was. And I've been doing the same thing now for over 2 years. And I saw something that caught my eye, and I thought, what's that? And there was something white sticking out of the ground. So I got close to it, my car, and then I walked across and looked down. And in this vole, which was no more than the size of this room, but you can't see it, but was this great big ship. It's supposed to be a fishing ship, but it's got all these antennas out of it. And I could see right away it was Russian. And there was two blokes in the bridge, spyglasses on me, and there was two blokes there doing the doping, the washing, making it look like we're all right. It was just sailors, and then there was a croft about a cottage, like about 100 yards away. So I raced to the cottage and banged on the door, and the lady came and I said, "It's an emergency. Where's your telephone?" And she pointed to it, and I picked up the telephone and I rang my base and told them what I found. And by the time it took me to run from there back, which was only about 4 or 5 minutes, one of our Shackleton bombers, maritime bombers, came down flashing his lights on it. Get out of this, get out of our territory and get back in the territorial waters. And you never saw this great big ship go through, scraping the side sort of things, getting out. And it must have had tremendous engines because the wall of water at the back of it, pushing against it, was almost as high as like as high as I could see. And it was racing away. And I reported it. And when I got back to my camp, I said to my officer, Lieutenant Armstrong, I said, what about that? And he went, shh, you don't know nothing. Because it's international. You can't do anything about it. And so they couldn't give me a medal. They couldn't give me any praise. So what they did is they made me a warrant officer. But that's as high as I could go in the ranks. So I became a warrant officer. And it wasn't until I thought about it years later that, there was blokes better than me in my trade, but I had done something different. Yeah.
And then how many more years until retirement from that point?
A long time. I didn't retire till I was 50. So I was 18 when I joined. On my birthday is June the 6th. And it was when I got demobbed, it was June the 6th, 50 years later, when I was 50. 32 years. And then I was called back. I didn't have to go, but I went. They had a royal visit to the camp, and they hadn't got anybody there with the experience of a royal visit. So they asked if I would come in and do it, to organize it. So I did.
And what have you been up to since after you're retired?
Oh, what have I been doing? Well, for 4 years, I stayed in the working for the camp, for the RAF camp. I was a mess manager in the officers' mess, and then when I retired after that. I worked with university. I worked for the university. St. John's and St. Mark's, yeah, as a bursar. That was about it. Then I took up working for the Lord, preaching and running churches and things. So, and I also joined the choir, and I'm still in that. I still sing in the choir at 95. It's a big joke because most of them are only in their 50s, 60s. And I do a lot of, that's one of the books I wrote. I don't know if you can see it. It's upside down, is it? Yeah.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
fine. I can see it.
Yeah, so I had 2 of those published, and then I've done a load of other books, but they've never been published.
Am I remembering correctly? I believe Steve told me you got to meet the Queen once.
Oh, that was in Aladdin. Yeah, we were a desert staging post. It was really an emergency place. Planes that were short of petrol or needed help, we were told the Queen was coming through with the Duke and her family. They're going on holiday to Kenya to a tree lodge there. And they landed and came through, and they only had the one meal, and then they flew off again and went to Kenya. And it was while I was in Kenya, her father, the King George, died, and so she had to come back, and they came back the same route, and we had to look after her. So we had they had stayed for breakfast, and then they took off. And people always said to me, "What did they have for breakfast?" Thinking they're going to get all this exotic food. And the Duke of Edinburgh, being an ex-sailor, he asked for kippers. You know what kippers are? A smoked fish, and well, he had that, and the Queen, I believe, had toast and scrambled eggs, and that's just all they have. In their own home, that's all they would have. It's only when they go to these big posh efforts that they have real food, or different food. But yeah, she looked so sad. Yeah, it's a big burden for somebody so young to become queen of the country.
How old would she have been at the time,
Oh,
roughly?
40,
No, 21.
21. But she had 2 children by then.
Should have been 21 or 22.
Yeah. So yeah, she could have been. I think she was a bit more than that. And we had waiters that RAF boys who were serving them, because other people were there as well, and so the cup she drank out of, drank her coffee out of, had her lipstick on it. Yeah, she was 25 when she went through, and so one of the lads made a case for it, and a glass front, and they put this cup in there and saucer where the Queen is used. And I often wonder what happened to it. Because when we moved out from there, not we, I'm talking about the Air Force, And when they moved out of there and came back, came to England and left that place because we didn't need it, as the last planes was leaving, the Russian were riding around the land, the Russian planes. So that's why they had all that trouble there.
Well, then finally, I guess, you said you're keeping a blog these days?
I write a blog every Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. I have Friday off, and then Saturday I do one, and then Sunday I do a message, Christian message.
How long have you been doing that?
Must be 10 years now, more, 10 to 15 years. Yeah.
Well, I guess if you can answer this one, what are you most proud of in life?
What am I most proud of? Well, that I came from a family, and I express this so often, that it's family that matters. And when I look back on my family, we had nothing at the beginning, and then as we got older and older, people started to prosper and so on. But we still kept together as a family. And I remember somebody saying, "How did you cope with 11? Your parents cope with 11 children. How do you discipline them? You don't. The older ones do it." And there was no problems, no troubles. And not once, my father said, "I never want to see a policeman at my door," and he never did. You know? I'm proud of it. So I'm just proud of a good family, good background. Yeah.
Well,
I
Mr.
guess
Kent,
that's-
that'll just about do it for my questions. Do you have anything else you'd like to share?
Oh, I did I used to play a lot of rugby for the Air Force, and I also used to throw the hammer for command. And I remember we were in Malta, and my wife had come out to see me, and there was a big chap there, a flight sergeant, and I was just a sergeant, and he was a big fellow, and he used to do 3 turns on the hammer before he threw it. You know, we're talking about the hammer in a cage. Yeah. Well, we didn't have a cage in Malta. We was just threw it, and I watched him and I thought, gosh, I'm only doing 1 turn, and he's doing 3. So I went away and I was trying it, and I thought I can do it. I know I can. So then he said, "Wheeler," and I went up and I stood there and I threw this thing, and I went past his marker, and I thought, that'll show him, but he was the bloke that came up, put his arms around me and said, "You learned a lot today." Yeah. So then I became command champion after that. I was 2 years in Germany and command champion. And NATO, serving with the Americans and Canadians and Germans and Dutch, Norwegians, French. So, a crazy outfit.
Well, I think that'll just about do it, sir. I do appreciate your time this evening.
Yep.
This has been a production of WWII Studios, LLC.